ਬੱਲਣੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਏ ਸ਼ੇਰ ਬੱਚੀਏ ਓ ਬੱਲਣੀ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਏ ਸ਼ੇਰ ਬੱਚੀਏ
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Yu, Curator of Public Programs at the Fowler Museum at UCLA. The Fowler is pleased to present a special online conversation with artists Rupy C, Keerat Kaur, and Saira Wasim, and co-curators Sonia, Dhami, and Syona Puliady for an in-depth look at our current exhibition, I Will Meet You Yet Again, Contemporary Sikh Art. Sonia Dhami is president of Art and Tolerance, a nonprofit organization with the mission to increase tolerance in humanity through the arts, trustee of the Sikh Foundation, and managing editor of the Sikh Research Journal. She has co-edited 2 richly illustrated books, Sikh Art from the Kapani Collection, a definitive volume on Sikh art published by the Smithsonian, and Games We Play, a bilingual book in Punjabi and English published by the Sikh Foundation. She has organized and curated several Sikh art exhibitions, conferences, community programs, and publications. Syona Puliady is a curator of textiles of the Eastern Hemisphere at the Fowler Museum. Her research focuses on the histories and textiles of the Indian Ocean realm. As a descendant of a community known for their artistic intelligence and production of textiles in South India, Syona also collaborates with artists and garment laborers in Tamil Nadu to explore how these communities imbue their self-expression in visual, sensory, and performing arts, all of which subtly weave their unique identities into a Tamil landscape. If you have any questions during the program, please submit them through the question and answer function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote entries that you would like to be considered to be answered by the artists and curators at the end of the program. And now over to you, Sonia and Syona.
Thank you, Hannah, for the kind introduction, and lots of gratitude to you and the team at the Fowler Museum for organizing this talk today. I also welcome the panel and the audience which has joined us today. The show, I Will Meet You Yet Again, Contemporary Sikh Art, is a major exhibition of more than 40 contemporary works by both Sikh and non-Sikh artists. It includes paintings, textiles, soundscape, poetry, digital media, and all of these converge around an understanding of home. The struggle to claim space, sangharsh, the joy of building home, basera, alongside that tender spot in our hearts, which longs for that which has been left behind, birha. And the title of the show, I Will Meet You Yet Again, is inspired by Amrita Preetham's poem, Main Tenu Fer Milangi. And these words, they reflect the recurrence of sangharsh, basera, and birha in our lifetimes, both as individuals and collectively as a community. Syona?
Thank you all for joining us today. There is an incredible amount of artists and talent that we see in this show, and today we have the honor of speaking with Rupy C, Keerat Kaur, and Saira Wasim to go through some of their insights and generous talent that they're bringing to this show. So I want to introduce each of the 3 artists. First, we have Rupy C, who studied calligraphy and Indian miniature painting at the Prince's Foundation School of Traditional Arts, London in 2016. She previously received a BS from UCLA and an MPH from Loma Linda University, California. She has enjoyed solo exhibitions including Out of Place, ICA San Francisco, Search and Rescue, Jessica Silverman, San Francisco, and A Recipe for Brown Skin, Triton Museum of Art, Santa Clara, California, and A Journey Back Home, Peel Art Gallery and Museum Archives, Ontario. Tut's work is in the permanent collection of Crocker Art Museum, Sacramento, the De Young Fine Arts Museum of San Francisco, and Asian Art Museum, San Francisco. She lives and works in Oakland, California, and is represented by Jessica Silverman Gallery, San Francisco. Next, we have Keerat Kaur, an artist and architect with Sikh Punjabi roots. Her work takes shape through the disciplines of painting, sculpture, writing, music, and architecture. Drawing inspiration from Sikh philosophies, she employs metaphor and symbolism to revolutionize our relationship to nature and spirituality. Her recent work contributes to the advancement of language learning and preservation. Keerat currently lives and works between Vancouver, British Columbia, and London, Ontario. Finally, we have Saira Wasim, a visual artist based in Massachusetts, but originally hailing from Lahore, Pakistan, where she earned her BFA from the National College of Arts. Trained in Persian and Indian miniature painting traditions, she has cultivated a unique artistic practice that deeply engages with the visual narratives of South Asia. Her artistic repertoire spans painting, mixed media collage, sculpture, and video animation. Exploring themes of power, politics, globalization, female identity, and the nuanced experiences of being a Muslim woman in the United States, Saira's work reflects a profound interrogation of societal constructs. And then I will turn it back to Sonia.
Thank you, Syona, for the introduction. So let's get the panel started, and let's start by hearing a brief introduction from the panel, from the artists Rupy, Keerat, and Saira, about their backgrounds and their journey as artists and creators, and also if they can share a little bit information about the piece that they, of one of the works within the shows. So Rupy, can we start with you?
Yes, thank you, Sonia. Hello, everybody. That's a hard question to answer because how much can I amass in a few minutes? I have grown with stories of displacement because of grandparents who went through the 1947 partition of India. So a lot of my work begins where their journey kind of ended, which is in a new place, in a new land, trying to find belonging, and in the process, displaying a huge amount of resilience, which I then experienced as a 12-year-old when I moved to the US from India. And somewhere I think I was meant to have those experiences because I was meant to create work that rooted in itself in the search for identity constantly. And somewhere it has aided me in my search for identity constantly as a woman, as a mother, through analysis of my own conditioning and then deconditioning that self, but at the same time, dismantling the patriarchal boundaries by which I have been not bound, but also experienced, basically interacted with. Other than that, my work is definitely centered on the Sikh scriptures, specifically the line that says, Jaise jalte budbuda ubje bin se neet, which is that life is kind of similar to a bubble of water on the surface of water. And I think for me, that short-lived nature of life is something that dictates my work often and helps me examine the idea of us living on this earth and what do we leave the earth with and what do we leave the earth as. So a lot of the work is centered on this analysis of land, but also at the same time, place and how we care for it and how we relate to it. Okay, that was a really quick summary, and I'll move on to this commission that I was so grateful to receive for this show. The show is a very significant show for me because it does center narratives that have otherwise not been centered or not been mentioned at all. So for me, these two paintings, this diptych, was an opportunity to kind of center the viewer also, as well as, of course, my own will to create something very personal and very, very deeply personal, because this diptych is laid out on top of a blueprint of my grandmother's house. And it was my grandmother's house because it was in her name. And the left side is Biji Dakar and the right is Biji Dekar. Biji Dakar as in my grandmother's house, and Biji Dekar meaning at my grandmother's house. Initially, this commission, when I spoke to Sonia and Syona and the team about it, my initial analysis was, how has home, how has belonging, how has a woman's sense of place and identity changed intergenerationally? How has this home been used by me? How has it been used by my grandmother? How has it been nourished by each of us? And how has our individual focus, mine being my individual reasons, my individual sense of boundaries, my individual sense of being, dictated the use of that space and the identity of that space, and how is my grandmother's individual will to always find belonging and create belonging for the community, defined her space and place in that house itself. And also in this effort, I found out that I was actually looking at how home changes in general for all of us. And many of us who don't live close to our ancestral homes, we're constantly, creating a home in our mind. And then there's an actual home that exists. And then there's these gaps that we continue to fill in. So for me, this diptych is about filling in those gaps, which is an exercise I've constantly engaged with since the year I moved here. But at the same time, it's about, finding that space and relating to that space again, as a woman, as a mother, as someone who's trying to also relate to my grandmother, my Nanny Ji, through that relationship, rather than the relationship of her being so heroic and going through 1947 partition so gracefully and with resilience. And there are other works in the show which have multiple different reasons to be in the show, but I'm grateful that this diptych was able to be created for the show, centering the viewer, circumambulating this house within the show, because I wanted each perspective to be reflected and to know that a home can have multiple perspectives depending on who's looking at it and where they're looking at it from. I hope that sums up a lot of it. Thank you, Sonia, for that question.
Beautiful, very beautiful. Thank you, Rupy. Keerat?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I'm honestly so happy to be here today, and I feel like it's a bit of an extension to this wonderful show that has been so impactful and has been so enriching for me personally. And yeah, I'd like to start off as well, just talking a little bit about what it is that I do. So my practice comprises a few different mediums, so overarching music, the visual arts, and architecture. So I am a licensed architect, although that has become a bit more of a part-time practice for me. But the way that I've seen all of these different mediums in my life has been very much as tools rather than defining titles for what it is that I do. And I think for my career as an artist, it's really tricky to pinpoint where that idea really began, because I think the seeds were planted when I was very young. And it was most definitely centered around Sikh and Punjabi traditions of storytelling. So when I was younger, on one hand, I was surrounded by all of these vivid Disney cartoons and all of these interesting animations that are, part of a childhood growing up in the West. And then on the other hand, I had a household and a family. I had parents who were very much passionate about enriching me and my brother with these stories from Sikh traditions, from Punjabi folklore. And although a lot of these stories were passed down through the oral tradition, I always wanted to give them a visual realm. So, my first inclination, anytime I did hear one of these sakhis or tales, was to illustrate them and was to take those very vivid metaphors, the very vivid symbolism from those stories, and give them an actual visual identity. And I think that even today, that's how I would really define my practice. I mean, it began that way as a child. And even today, I would say that no matter what it is that I do, it's heavily centered around narrative and quite often very literally around text. So whether it's through writing or whether the text quite literally appears in my work. And you can see that in the painting that's up on the screen right now. This is one of the pieces that's in the show. And this was one of the pieces commissioned by and currently in the Kanuja family collection. And this piece is what I would describe as an illuminated manuscript of a passage from Suraj Prakash Granth. And Sonia, you did mention this in the intro as well. And this book is a Sikh historical text, which translates to Book of the Rising Sun, Suraj Prakash. And it basically goes over moments of Sikh history through poetry. And in this particular passage, we have, this 5-part story that's telling the martyrdom of 2 key figures in Sikh history, Baba Zorawar Singh and Baba Fateh Singh. And it really talks about these different stages in their confrontation with the Mughal court at the time. And so it's depicted in 5 parts, starting with Gangu's betrayal, Cold Winds, Unjust Trial, Merciless Fate, and the last one is Pandemonium. And the way that this piece functions is that it's quite intentional with a lot of different aspects that I think my practice often amalgamates. So there's architectural intention, there's a little bit of digital language that comes in, although this piece is gouache and acrylics on artboard, so it is a very traditional medium. It includes a lot of these different facets. So for example, if you look at, we might get into this later in detail, but the figure in the bottom left, he's pixelated intentionally, of course, because in Sikh history, we don't actually say this person's name because of the story of betrayal. And in the second tower, the second section, the tower that Mata Gujriji and the 2 Sahibzade are sitting in, that's actually based off of a visual account that my father actually gave me. So although this tower no longer exists anymore, he was able to recount the different architectural details to it. And then of course, there's some imagined history that I've layered onto it. So yeah, so this is one of the 2 pieces that speaks to the martyrdom of the Sahibzade. The other piece speaks about the martyrdom of the 2 elder Sahibzade. And this piece is really just about looking at the way that their martyrdom was described through Suraj Prakash, through these different metaphors, the use of symbolism, and centering Mata Gujriji as their protector during this time, and just looking at the poetics of Sikh history and this particular text and giving it a visual dimension. And another one of the works that's included in the show is actually a surrealist architectural story, which touches on a little bit more about the natural world and how that impacts the way that we live and exist. And these 2 pieces are more so about drawing from history and the way that we've spoken about strength through symbolism, through metaphor, through poetry.
Thank you, Keerat. Thanks a lot. And now Saira.
Okay, hello to everybody. My name is Saira Wasim, and I'm from Lahore, Pakistan. I was trained in National College of Arts, and I moved to USA in 2003. And since then, I'm just actively, I'm an art practitioner and actively painting and making art and exhibiting my works. When I was in National College of Arts, we were trained to make our own pigments, surface, Wesley. So, I was a part of this neo miniature painting movement where we combine traditional techniques, centuries old format of miniature painting. And we combine the contemporary themes and subject matter and making a political satire works. So in this exhibition, my work on the road to Kartarpur Sahib, the artwork talks about the significant event of a grand opening making the first anniversary and grand opening and inauguration of Kartarpur corridor in November 2019. So majority of my works recently are based on Punjab and about South Asia, and how I believe that we need to work on soft borders and bringing peace and tolerance in the region. So that's it. I just work every day in my studio and make art, and actively participating in exhibition and showcasing my works. Thank you.
Thank you, Saira. And thank you to all the artists and on the panel for this very enlightening introduction, as well as sharing about your artistic practice and things that move you and have impacted your creative journey. So my first question to all of you would be to address this elephant in the room. What is Sikh art? And conventionally, when we refer to this label, this term, Sikh art, we find that it is paired with either religion or history. And as a viewer, as a Sikh, as a curator, I find this problematic because this narrative majorly excludes the perspective and the labor of women. Moreover, it also tends to focus mostly on the past. But this exhibit collectively disrupts the status quo. It challenges the conventional pairing that I feel each of your works in the show is expanding the meaning of Sikh art. And my question to you is, how do you individually interpret Sikh art as artists working today and engaging with contemporary issues, which include gender equity, climate change, and political rhetoric? So we can start with Rupy, your first.
I like this question because I think it's the importance of this term and this question is to actually question ourselves in this way constantly. Because I believe that any term, and in this instance, a term like Sikh art, which is deeply personal for some people, deeply community-based for others, it can be so inclusive, yet also so exclusive. And it can also come with an intention of including others and also come with an intention of excluding. So I believe that, firstly, that the term has a different meaning for each and every one of us. For me, it's actually how I set my values and intentions as an artist is when this term becomes relevant and important to me, because my values and the way I intend to make my work and how I tell stories comes from those storytellers who've trained me to tell those stories, who happen to be Sikh women. And their tradition of storytelling, as Keerat also mentioned, this really heavy, beautiful, constant tradition of narratives and storytellings that we grew up on. These stories are meant to guide you with values and intentions. And when those stories guide me in those values and intentions, whether it's looking at reproductive rights or it's looking at Sikh history, for me, that's what the term means, where I can guide myself with these values and intentions that I've been brought up on, and also the ones that I've set for myself as an artist. Which is why I often ask the question, if something is Sikh art, then what makes something not Sikh art? But I would still say that just like the word tradition, it has a huge amount of baggage it carries, and something that I constantly like to experience in a way that where I say tradition is something we make every single day. We just don't call it tradition because it's an unpopular way of referring to tradition, or it's just an unpopular word in some ways for some people. But for me, I think we make tradition every day. So in the same way, I think this term requires for us to re-examine it at all times and find a personal meaning for it before we define it for others.
Thank you, Rupy. Keerat?
Yeah, I actually really like, Rupy, the way that you framed that, in the sense that the idea of Sikh art is so personal. And to be honest, like, it's not really something that I've actively thought about, I think, because I think at some point when you do something constantly, it just becomes a part of you and you're not conscious about it and you're not necessarily questioning it or why it is what it is. And I say that because I think anything that I create is Sikh art, whether it's explicitly about Sikh historical themes or the Sikh practices of all sorts, right? But the thing that I think makes Sikh art is similar to what you said, Rupy, the intention. So I feel like what I love about this show, for example, is that the artists themselves are people who practice Sikhi in very different, very versatile ways. And from that lens itself, I think those voices shine through. And the fact that those artists are Sikh artists, for me, I think, is a way to say that it is Sikh art, because, Sikhi, like it has been described throughout the years, is a way of thinking. It's a way of, looking at the world through a certain philosophical lens, right? And taking from moments of history and the way that certain situations have been dealt with in history through that Sikh lens, and being inspired by scripture and sort of seeing that, right? So if you're actively doing that and you actively identify as a Sikh and you actively identify as someone who practices Sikh thought, I think that in itself categorizes one's work as Sikh art as well. And I mean, for me, it's very personal and quite literal in the sense that my aim has always been to examine these aspects of history that are lesser known. And of course, one of those is the role of women. And I feel like what we can really do as artists is extrapolate on that. And, even through the imagined, we can give those treasures a place in the contemporary world. So I really think that it's just such a personal experience to create Sikh art and experience Sikh art, because I think that it's not just about the creator who's making the work. I think it's also about the lens of the audience. So if you're looking at certain work from the Sikh lens, I mean, I believe that that work can be deemed as Sikh art. Like, I've looked at so many pieces in my life where I'm like, wow, that's so Sikh, right? Like it just really resonates with me, and it just resonates with the way that I see Sikhi. So I think it's definitely about your perspective and your personal way of life through which you're seeing things, whether you're the artist or the audience.
Thank you, Keerat. Saira? Saira, you're muted.
Oh, thank you so much for reminding me. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for, I'm honored to be part of this exhibition and this webinar. And, for me, Sikh art, I'm honored to be in part of this show. So when you say Sikh art, when you say this, I hear it as art from Punjab. For me, it's Punjab, my homeland. So let me give you a beautiful analogy. This is the way I see it, because being Muslim and part of this show, it's like you are inside the building, you are talking about the interior, and I'm outside and I'm looking at the exterior of the same building. We are both on the same spot, but I'm outside and you guys are inside, but still we are together. It's you are coming from I mean, a religious point of view, but for me, it's about historical heritage. I'm coming from that. So it's for me, it's all about Punjabiyat, embracing the idea of unity and common cultural historical heritage. This is the way I see it. Ji, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, I just loved hearing your individual perspectives on this. Rupy mentioned this, like how do you look at what is Sikh art or what is not Sikh art? I mean, and I think that's an amazing line of inquiry that we can use for ourselves, that lens. And Keerat, you shared your personal inquiry into the term and what it means to you, and how like we have to continue this process with us. And Saira, you mentioned about the shared heritage, and that's beautiful because that's a common heritage which we as Sikhs, as Hindus, as Muslims, as Jains living together also own. So that was really a wonderful insight into your thinking. And I'll move on to the adding more questions now. Rupy, Rupy, we have 4 pieces by you in the show. And each one of them is so different from the others. There is one we can see on the screen right now, which is the installation of Carry On Baggage. And then you showed us before your diptych, Biji Da Kar, Biji De Kar, which was a piece specially commissioned for this show by the museum. And while that piece as a painting is stunning, but I feel sometimes viewers usually might not be able to comprehend the labor that it entails. And it makes me think of the unseen and the unacknowledged labor of women in building home. From the large size format of this painting to the pigments that you crush and you mix to get the colors to preparing the paper itself. So can you share what this process is like and why you choose to take on this labor?
Why does any woman choose to take on the labor of being one? And that's a really, really like a question that you can't find answers to, yet you find multiples. For me, these works I create are my intention and my kind of, my mom puts this very simply when I'm unavailable for so many things. And she's like, "Teri tai bhakti hai." This is your worship. This is your devotion to whatever that, and I grew up in a way where artists are meant to be people who actually have a little bit of an extra, I would say, awareness of the world. And from that awareness stems this idea of, everything I create has to come from, and also I think with the style that I use to create this work and the methodology I use to create this work, it comes with this very strong intention of love and surrender, something I know many women can relate to. I also think that that's also something that I feel like even men in my life relate to, because they have been very loving and surrendering of their patriarchal superiority, which, they have surrendered and kind of not competed with anything, that women are taking up and empowering themselves to do. Having said that, these works are, of course, done with this training that I've had, this traditional training of Puliady painting, where the actual pigments I mix in the studio, these 5 or 6 pigments that I mix in the studio, and I'm grinding those pigments, getting them ready for over 2 weeks to prepare these paintings that are quite large. The intention of mixing the pigments, burnishing the paper, which is basically polishing the paper. And every time you polish paper, you can imagine like a typewriter going across a piece of paper. And that's what burnishing is. It's kind of, pressing the paper and streaking this line and creating heat so these pigments bind well to the paper. And as well as getting this paper, this vasili, and then making sure that it is prepared in a way that it allows for these pigments to kind of settle into them. All of these processes are, and like Saira mentioned, that training includes, traditional training in these styles includes us knowing this process. And then I think for me, it's very important to continue that training and continue that way of creating in the studio for many reasons. One of them being that every work I create, I have always thought that it has to have some sort of historical relevance and historical impact. So for me, I think every piece of painting has to speak to, a recent historical event, but it also has to speak to a personal event, but it also has to speak to the history of this tradition that, initially has not generally been inclusive of women also. For me, I think as someone who's not trained in India, but trained in London, There's another layer of separation between tradition, but at the same time, a different way of owning this tradition, which is that I'm generally, learning this tradition from a woman and also practicing it as a woman. And how that's different and why that's significant is that there is a centering of narratives that is, the narrative of my life, narrative of the life of my mother, my grandmothers, any women who are on this call or on the Zoom session. It's the narratives that we all generally know of that don't generally make it to paintings. And the reason I'm mentioning why the narratives are important is because that's why the making is important. I imagine myself laboring further if I'm telling the story of my mother versus telling the story of, maybe a rich heiress. I imagine myself laboring more if I'm telling the story of my grandmother as a storyteller, as a significant influence in my life. And I imagine that labor is done with love and surrender versus me telling the story of, an imperialistic character. So the labor and the story goes together and fits together for me in that way. Now, besides that, of course, there are days in the studio where, there's days spent just grinding pigment, there's days spent just burnishing. Then there's days spent using this, fine technique that allows you to build slowly on what you know, but also what you want to explore within this training. And then, of course, there's days that I spend that, I'm trying to own this tradition as something well, not own it, actually. I'm trying to create a new one where the stories of women are at the beginning of it and not just being added on. It's not a plate that's totally full and then I'm just scooping in a little bit of the stories of my grandmothers and my mothers and all the women I care about. It's not that. For me, I'm like, I'm going to give you guys the whole plate. And that plate is my tradition that I am, trying to say that this is the tradition that I'm beginning, is that where the plate belongs to the stories of women that I see as significant and lives that I see as significant. And labor is at the foundation of that, because I think even in my own life, going through this labor in the studio, which is somewhat awarded, somewhat glorified, because it's still an ambitious form of labor, right? But that labor has helped me appreciate the labor that mothers, grandmothers, aunts, house help, all these women are going through to sustain and nourish life. And I do this labor or or some sort of laborious practice in my studio to sustain an ambition. And I think there is some sort of an appreciation that is very important for me to highlight and keep very close to me when I'm making this work. Making is not glamorous at all. I think what we think of artists is like, most of us see us on these panels and we look put together and there's art in the background and we think that's what being an artist is. No, being an artist is if you imagine a woman who's in the kitchen sweating and laboring. That's what actually being an artist is, that you are tired, you are physically creating work. And what better parallel for me to have than to then imagine, what it is like to be in a kitchen where the chutney was being ground down versus being in a mixie. Like the pigment is being ground down versus being blended and coming to me in a tube. I think for me, there's no other way for me to honor the lives of the women who've impacted me and continue to impact me than to engage in this labor every single day. Of course, I get paid for it. They don't even get paid for it. Besides that, I would say that in these two works specifically, there is a certain labor that women have, like you said, unseen labor that women have in constructing worlds and caring for worlds. For me, that world is my paintings, so I take great amount of labor in constructing that world. Grinding pigment for an hour or 2 hours is not something that's unfamiliar to me. Things going wrong, recipes going wrong is not unfamiliar to me, and neither it is unfamiliar to any woman. We know how to construct worlds, we know how to patch things up, and we also know how to, find some sort of footing in a world that never lets us stand solidly and still. And I think I'll end it there before I get too emotional.
Thank you, Rupy. That was very well put together and explained. And I'll move to the next question, just watching the time. So this is for Keerat. Keerat, we have multiple pieces in the show which are created by you. Two of these pieces are inspired by the 19th century Suraj Prakash Granth, the manuscript that you talked about, while the Sky Dome 35 is a dreamlike imagination of the future. And you also work in multiple media, including marble, paper, digital media, music, etc. But many of these works, to me, they seamlessly seem to merge centuries-old art traditions with the modern techniques, and you create these unique artistic works. And I would like to understand that, does technology play a significant part in your process as you start and develop and complete a work?
It really does. And I think that because I have worked in, and I do work in a few different mediums, all of them really end up influencing one another quite strongly. And I think when it comes to the planning of my pieces, whether they're visual or, 2D, 3D, whatever it is, I think that I've begun approaching it like an architect in a lot of ways. But at the same time, like I mentioned, narrative has always been so central. But for example, looking at it through the architectural lens, because we're always using these digital softwares, I think it really helps to be able to use those tools to plan out different compositions. If there's going to be some sort of built object in the piece, for example, sometimes I will actually 3D model it first. Not that I've done that for any of the pieces in this particular show. Actually, for Sky Dome, 100% I did, but for the paintings, I didn't necessarily do it for them. But for other paintings that I've done, I will actually quite literally build out what this space is going to look like on Revit. Anyone who's familiar with architecture will have used that software, but I've used those tools to assist me. And I think that, for me, it's really become about world building. So it's about exploring these different concepts through different mediums. And I don't ever want to be bound by a single medium. That doesn't really interest me, just because I don't want, I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I think that for artists, the journey is very much the realist part. And for me, I feel like the destination sometimes doesn't even really exist in a sense, because, for me, once I complete a work, I won't necessarily ever really look at it again the same way someone in the audience might, right? It's always about working on the next piece, working on the next project. And so in that sense, the process is very important. And I think part of learning different methods of creating different mediums, that's always been definitely a central focus for me. And I think that's something that I observed from my parents growing up. And, it's like that cliche of immigrants being very resourceful, but it was essentially a really big point of inspiration for me, because I would see them, if they wanted something, they wouldn't necessarily buy it, but they might make it. Especially my dad, he was always very handy. If there was ever anything that needed to be renovated in the house, he would do it himself. If he needed to, if my brother and we needed something, he would sometimes even just make it for us, like if it was like some sort of toy or whatever it was. He was always very good with carpentry and tools, and still has this huge collection. And in an interesting way, I feel like I'm very much my parents' child, and the gifts that they've given me are really the things that I'm harnessing and harvesting. And so, yeah, it's very much about, for me, using all these different tools and creating these worlds. And, I don't want to stop until someone's like, oh, hey, Keerat, nice car. And I can be like, thank you, I made it. Yeah, a little bit of a joke, but I mean, on a serious note, that is something that I aspire to, in the sense that I never want to be complacent with the methodology that I use. And, whether that's digital, using all these new methods of creating and assisting, I think it's just a way to enrich our practices. And yeah, just mixing these different tools of visual communication as well, from ultra traditional to ultra modern. I love combining that because I think that that's very much a reflection of who we are as well, especially people who take inspiration from historical treasures and that heritage treasure trove that we have, because we are evolving and preserving history, but we're trying to give it a place in the contemporary as well. So I think of myself as a collage in a sense, right? Like I just feel like a cultural collage, and it wasn't just about being exposed to Sikh culture, Punjabi culture, but I grew up in a city that as I grew older, it became quite multicultural. So I was exposed to a lot of different music, a lot of different languages, different ways of thinking. And also, on the topic of language, I feel like speaking different languages itself is a tool and a way of thinking. The way that I think in Punjabi or the way that I think in French is very different from the way that I think in English. And interestingly enough, anytime that I actually speak about my work in Punjabi, I feel more enriched by it, which actually took me by surprise because it's not necessarily the language that is my strongest. English is that for me, but yeah, it's just there's so much out there, and I just, as an artist, I want to just continue to take from it and keep building.
Thank you, Keerat. And I really I agree with you about being able to experience it in Punjabi, because at the Fowler I gave a couple of tours, and it was the first time I spoke about the piece. It was a Punjabi language tour, talking about it, and then also thinking about some of the vocabulary that what you would use, which we're so used to using in English, but words like patriarchy and gender equity, and so finding those words in Punjabi and getting, so initially it was a little, I was hesitant, but then slowly the flow came in, and I really enjoyed that. So yeah, thank you so much. So I will, Saira, the next question's for you. And your painting, which we saw earlier, was En Route to Kartarpur Sahib. It's a lovely piece, reflects the happiness experienced when you connect with something that you've been parted from. And I think it reflects Sangharsh and Birha. Both are there in this piece, which the Sikh community has experienced. But when you look at it, it doesn't evoke any pathos. It evokes joy. And I'm very interested to know is what motivated you to create this piece, and were there any challenges that you faced?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sonia. Let me give you a little background. This painting was initiated to commemorate the event, the grand opening, marking the first anniversary and inauguration of Kartarpur Sahib in 2019. So when we saw the visuals, pilgrims, the yatris visiting Kartarpur Sahib for the first time, they were deeply emotional. And I view those, I view this occasion as a crucial historical milestone in relationship to India and Pakistan, capturing significant public attention worldwide as well. So those moments held deep emotional significance for the Sikh community, as well as for Pakistani Punjabis also, who warmly welcomed the pilgrims, as they were the devotees of Guru Baba Nanak Ji. And it took us 72 years for us, India and Pakistan, to bridge the gap, or a distance mere 4 kilometers only. And I see it happening because of Baba Guru Nanak Ji. So this artwork is a tribute to Sikh community, whose silent prayer seems to have been answered ahead of 550th birth anniversary of Guru Baba Nanak Ji, with the opening of Kartarpur corridor. And And I see it as a ray of hope amidst the darkness that envelop India-Pakistan ties. Therefore, I firmly believe that it deserves representation on my Wesley or a canvas, and eventually to be displayed on public, public arena on the museum walls. This is what I believe. But and you said what were the challenges? Okay, when I saw those, the visuals and the YouTube videos that when those yatris, they visited Kartarpur Sahib and they went back to their homes in Sialkot, Narwal, their old home before partition, they were deeply emotional for me. And to from something very emotional to from that converting into something with very fun playful kind of artwork was a challenging, because I know I really cried looking into those interviews, and then I had to convert something with a fun, playful kind of artwork. So yeah, that was a very challenging thing. And you asked who are these guys in the front and the back? This is my ongoing series, and if you look into this, the guy with the yellow costume and the is India, and the guy in green is Pakistan. So these characters, I have, this is the way I portray India and Pakistan, two identical twin-like characters reoccurring again and again in my paintings. And, it portrays Indo-Pak, a nation. One is a reflection of another. And it's my way of saying that in unity lies our strength. So that's why they look very familiar. And at the back, they are Sikh yatris. One is holding a binocular and looking into the binocular, and the main character is looking at the viewer. So these are two yatris, three at the back, and my own characters, I invented in this series. Sometimes they are they're playing chess, and in another painting, they're having a cup of tea. So this is an ongoing series. This is the way they have been portrayed. Yeah.
Thank you, Saira. And we have a question, Saira, that I'm just going to read out. This is from Marina. And she writes that every time I look at your painting, I'm struck by the fact that it includes only men in a work by a woman. Why did you choose not to include women in this celebration? Does that have to do with still prevalent gender roles?
I don't know. I enjoy more making men, honestly. But my recent works, I have a work, but majority of the time, I don't know why I enjoy making male portraits more. But my feminist series, sometimes I have worked on feminist issues, and I've made female characters as well. But I don't know. It's my choice. It's my way of telling stories by putting male characters usually. Yeah.
No, that's fair enough, Saira. And I also feel perhaps maybe that plays into your mind as well, because most of this conflict stories that we see visually, we are seeing the men are involved in that conflict. Yeah. We very, very rarely, I think, see when women become the visual faces of that conflict. So fair enough. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Saira. And now looking at the time, we still have some time. In case any of the audiences have questions, please do add them to the chat, and we can pick them up as well. But I will move on to a question for Rupy. Rupy, as an artist now, your works are in numerous museums. They are at the Asian Art Museum, the De Young here in San Francisco, the Crocker, and a few others. Have you encountered any challenges or opportunities which is unique to being an artist of color in America?
Such a tough question. Challenges or opportunities? I think, I feel like, and this is a very, I would say, a cop-out answer, is that sometimes the challenge and the opportunity are within you at both times. because sometimes you believe you fit into a space and sometimes you believe you don't. Sometimes the space tells you you fit in and sometimes the space tells you don't. Sometimes you yourself weave a narrative that your traditional way of saying things or your contemporary way of saying things does not belong, or it does belong. So there's obviously a challenge in saying that, is that sometimes we are, our best supporter and sometimes our worst enemy. So with that said, I would say that the type of person I am, I always believe in focusing on what I want to do. When I walk into the studio at 9 a.m., I want to do better than when I walked into the studio 9 a.m. yesterday. For me, that's the focus anyway. So if things come my way, I don't let them jolt me off my axis too much. Yeah, but I do believe that if there were specifics that, I might have faced challenges or victories in, I could say that. But I do believe that there is one thing that, I've always kept true to myself, is that as a brown maker, as a brown woman maker, I don't give control of my narrative to anybody. And I think maybe that's why the challenges and the victories seem not as obvious sometimes. I always believe, whether it's curators, whether it's galleries, whether it's my collectors, whether it's my other colleagues, I'm very much, or the audience in general, I like to make sure that I'm very clear on my narrative and that I make that very obvious and known, because I don't want that narrative to be constructed by somebody else in words or in language or in ways that I don't agree with. So that has prevented some of the challenges, I believe. In another instance, I would say, it is a challenge to grow up in a traditional immigrant home and wanting to be a doctor, and not realizing that being an artist is something that you would actually be really good at. So knowing that happened to me 12 years ago, when I decided, I'm not going to be a doctor and I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to do what I want to do fully, which means that work on it 24/7. That was a challenge that I then overcame, which might be a challenge like a 15-year-old girl might be going through right now, where she's picking her path and saying, I want to be a doctor or engineer, or do I want to go into designing, or do I want to go into art? So in that way, I think the challenge of our own burdens as immigrant kids is, sometimes not letting us explore other pathways as easily. But at the same time, the victories are obviously there because there's such a strong sense of history and heritage that I grew up with, that it hasn't shook me off my axis that much. But yeah, if I were there specifics, I would have more feedback probably.
Thank you, Rupy. I'm reading another question here, and this time the question is for, oh, it's for me. Okay. It says, as a curator of the show, you highlighted the works of women artists in this exhibition. How challenging is it still being a women artist in India and Punjab? I greatly appreciate all the women's perspective. How much is it still an uphill struggle, the way it is for women everywhere? Would any of the artists like to answer this? Saira, is it an uphill struggle in Pakistan, in India?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was not able
So is it, how challenging is it still to be a woman artist in India and Punjab? I greatly appreciate all the women's perspectives. How much is it still an uphill struggle, the way it is for women everywhere?
I believe we have more women artists in Pakistan than men. Honestly, a lot of women are participating and being actively making art, and there are so many art practitioners, and we have less male artists than women. So I think I don't think so there is a challenge being an artist over there in Pakistan. Yeah.
Thank you. Rupy, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm sorry, my brain just turned on for this question. Of course, there are challenges. I mean, the minute we graduate high school, graduate college, get married, have children, these four uphill climbs. Anything can happen with our practices. The pandemic, so many women had to stop being makers to make sure that their families were okay. I mean, I myself was like, okay, I'm not going to be a painter anymore. I mean, what I'm saying is that the challenges still exist. And they do happen at, I think, these crucial moments. And that's when I believe like there's a loss of this beautiful pipeline of artists, at least in the US, the way I'm noticing it, which is why, you know, there needs to be a structure which supports and also digs women out of these, I would say, you know, holes sometimes that happen, because by the time we graduate high school, we want to make a decision that is career decision that is, you know, more reliable. When we graduate a career, we're asked to have an income that's reliable. When we do that, then we're married or, you know, whatever, in a partnership that's stable. Then in that way, also the patriarchal structures of family life, of extended family life, of work life, it's all curbing and impacting what we believe, what I believe we need as makers, which is that to be able to sit in the studio at 3 a.m. and 2 a.m. and 1 a.m., to be able to be absent from the daily routine if we need to be as makers. And I think women have that option far less, which is also maybe, you know, why we still persevere, because we kind of figure out these creative ways to persevere. And I agree with Saira, there are a lot more women makers, but we are not the ones whose work is being bought as often. We are not the ones whose work is being shown as often. I mean, it's changing, of course, in the mainstream and in the general art world as well. But I would still say there's so much that needs to change in so many different ways.
Thank you, Rupy. Hannah, are we, I think we are out of time now. So I'd like to, should we end the...
Sure. I'm actually curious, Keerat, do you also have, would you also like to add your perspective to this conversation to kind of round out the conversation tonight?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. As Saira and Rupy were expressing their thoughts, I was, you know, also reflecting on the different challenges, and there's like a few levels and layers to it. Like, I think one is definitely that, you know, sometimes you go through challenges as an artist, and if you're kind of in your own world about it, you're not always cognizant about why that challenge is there. You know, whether it's a certain opportunity that you're not getting, or, you know, certain feedback is said to you in certain ways, and, you know, you're not always cognizant of it. But the things that are very much in your face challenges are things like, it would be what you described, just some of the familial obligations and expectations that are there. And I mean, I consider myself very fortunate, grateful as well. And I'm sure that a lot of this is a product of efforts that I've had to make, but also I think some of it is just, you know, naturally being someone who's A, very introverted, B, I guess I've always had a strong sense of boundary, just to protect like that introverted bubble kind of thing. But you know, it's not always that simple for a lot of people. There are a lot of obligations, a lot of caretaking that has to be done. And oftentimes it feels like swimming upstream. But things that have helped me overcome that, some of them are just, you know, like I was blessed with a family, parents who were always very supportive of the arts as a career and just as a way of life. But then also for me, like sisterhood has been, like, I can't even put into words, you know, just having other women friends who are creators around me and who, you know, I have embraced as sisters, and I've seen the way that they've crafted time for themselves, for their work, to make the efforts that they need to make. I think finding community is really important because it's such an inspirational, it's just such an inspirational moment that we need. And, you know, like even talks like this, like we're a Zoom room full of women that are all pursuing different creative pursuits, different academic pursuits, artistic pursuits, and just being in spaces like this is heavily inspiring and so crucial. So I've realized that, you know, even though I am this introvert, that I do need doses of community where I feel inspired and where I feel like I can, you know, muster up strength to just do what I need to do and focus on the goal. So yeah, I would say, like, for me, community has been something that I really rely on to overcome those battles.
Thank you so much. What a interesting conversation, and especially to have it during this month of March when the world is celebrating International Women's Month. What a memorable conversation we've had. We've talked of things of cultural collages, love and surrender, soft borders. So I'd like to thank all the artists, Saira, Rupy, Keerat, and Syona for joining us today, as well as Hannah for organizing this. So I'll hand it over to Hannah now. Thank you to the audience as well.
Thank you to the artists and the curators of the exhibition. Thank you for giving our online audience insight into your own artistic practices and views that only enriches the exhibition. I will meet you yet again, contemporary Sikh art. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you had the time and opportunity, please stop by the Fowler Museum at UCLA to see this special exhibition on view until May 26, 2024. This program has been recorded and will be uploaded to the Fowler website for you to revisit and share in a few weeks. I hope you'll be able to join us for our upcoming public programs, especially our online Lunch and Learn with Sonia Dhami next week, Tuesday, March 19 at 12:30 p.m. Details of all programs are on our website and our social media. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and we will see you all soon again.